I bought the mansion for silence. Then my mom texted, "Perfect. Your brother can move in on Friday." 10 minutes later, my driveway camera caught a moving truck and a mobile notary. When I said no, my dad didn't argue. He filed paperwork pretending I was someone else. At 2:13 in the morning, he stuffed my PEO box with fake affidavits while my trail cam recorded every second. And on New Year's Eve, they came back with a mediator, not knowing a deputy was already inside my foyer. My name is Eva Larkspur. I stood on the edge of the cantilevered deck of Ravenfall Lodge, watching the fog roll through the valley of Pinevale like a slow, white ocean. The air up here was thin and smelled of pine needles and coming snow. It was the kind of cold that cleaned you out, stripping away the smog of the city and the noise of a life I had spent 34 years trying to apologize for. I had signed the closing papers exactly 4 hours ago. The ink was barely dry on the deed, filed under a generic LLC name I had created just for this purpose, Cedar Wren Holdings. I had done everything right. I had hired a broker who specialized in privacy. I had used a PEO box in town. I had told no one in Greyhaven that I was leaving, not even the barista who made my oat milk latte every morning for 5 years. I wanted to vanish. I wanted the holidays to be nothing but a blank white page. But the silence was so profound, so intoxicating, that I made a rookie mistake. I let my guard down. I pulled my phone from my parka pocket. The screen glowed, a jarring artificial light against the twilight settling over the mountains. I snapped one single photo. It was a simple shot, just the railing of the deck, my boots resting on the cedar planks, and that endless, glorious drop into the clouds below. I didn't tag the location. I didn't add a caption about new beginnings or fresh starts. I just posted it to my private feed, the one I thought was safe, the one restricted to friends and family. I put the phone down on the outdoor table and wrapped my hands around a mug of hot tea. For 9 minutes, I owned my life. Then the phone buzzed against the wood. It was a short, sharp vibration, like a warning shot. I glanced down. It was a notification from the group chat named the Larkspur Corps. My stomach tightened, a reflex honed over decades of conditioning. I picked up the phone. The first message was from my mother, Maris. There was no greeting. There was no question asking where I was or if the view was nice. There was only a terrifying, practical efficiency. Kwadung look. She had typed, "Perfect timing. Grant and Callie can move in Friday. It will be good for them to be out of the city before the baby comes." I stared at the screen, the steam from my tea freezing in the air. She hadn't asked if I had bought it. She hadn't asked if I was renting. She hadn't asked if I had space. She saw a resource, and she had immediately assigned it to the person who mattered, before I could even process the audacity. The second message came through. This one was from my father, Elliot. His typing bubble lingered for a long time, signaling a lecture. Acquiring a major asset requires family consultation. Ava, we need to discuss the logistics. There will be an appropriate coordination of usage. We cannot have resources sitting idle. I felt the blood drain from my face. They were talking about my home, my sanctuary. As if it were a corporate subsidiary they had just decided to liquidate. They were already stripping the walls, moving the furniture, and allocating the bedrooms. Then came the third notification. It was from Grant, my older brother. The golden child whose failures were always framed as bad luck, and whose successes were treated like divine intervention. He didn't write a paragraph. He didn't offer a thank you. He simply sent a single emoji, a green checkmark. That checkmark hit me harder than the words. It was dismissive. It was final. It meant he had already accepted the gift I hadn't given. It implied that my compliance was so guaranteed, so baked into the architecture of our family, that he didn't even need to use language to claim my property. I looked back up at the mountains. The peace was gone. The silence of the valley now felt heavy, pressing in on me. I turned around and looked through the massive floor-to-ceiling glass windows into the living room of the lodge. The fireplace was crackling, casting a warm orange glow on the empty hardwood floors. I had imagined reading there. I had imagined sleeping until noon. I had imagined a Christmas where I didn't have to shrink myself to fit into the corners of Grant's spotlight. I looked back at the phone. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. For 30 years, I would have typed, "Let me check my schedule," or "Maybe we can work something out." I would have offered a compromise. I would have let them take a weekend, which would turn into a week, which would turn into them moving in. But the air up here was different. I wasn't in Greyhaven anymore. I was the sole signatory of Cedar Wren Holdings. I was the woman who had just dropped the majority of her savings to buy a fortress. I typed 2 sentences. "No, I already have plans." I hit send. I watched the status change to delivered, then read. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was the heavy, pressurized silence of a bomb that had just been armed. I waited for the explosion. I waited for the barrage of guilt-tripping texts, the phone calls, the demands for an explanation. But the phone didn't buzz with a text. Instead, it rang. It wasn't my mother. It wasn't my father. It was a local number I didn't recognize, with a Pinevale area code. I frowned and swiped to answer, bringing the phone to my ear. "Hello. Hi, this is Mike from Summit Logistics and Moving," a gruff male voice said on the other end. The background noise sounded like a dispatch office, radios chattering. "Just calling to confirm the access code for the gate on Friday morning. We have a heavy load, full nursery set, and a master bedroom suite, so we will need to get the truck right up to the main entrance." I stood frozen on the deck. The cold wind bit through my parka. But I didn't feel it. "I didn't hire movers," I said, my voice steady but low. "I know, ma'am," Mike replied, sounding bored, flipping through papers on his end. "The booking was made under a Mr. Grant Larkspur. The destination is Frostline Summit Road. He paid the deposit an hour ago. Said you were the site contact for the key exchange." I lowered the phone slowly, staring at the screen. An hour ago, my mother's text hadn't been a spontaneous reaction to my photo. My father's lecture about consultation wasn't advice. Grant's checkmark wasn't a joke. They had found out I bought the house before I even posted the picture. Maybe a loose-lipped broker in the city. Maybe they had been tracking my credit inquiries. It didn't matter how. What mattered was that they had known. They had discussed it. They had planned the move. And they had waited until I confirmed I was on the premises to spring the trap. They booked the movers before they even asked me. They paid a deposit on a house I hadn't invited them to. This wasn't a family visiting for the holidays. This was an eviction notice for my own life. "Ma'am," the mover asked, his voice tinny coming from the phone I was still clutching. "Do we have the gate code? Or should I call Mr. Larkspur back?" I looked at the driveway camera feed on my phone. The long, winding gravel road leading up to my sanctuary was empty, but I could feel them coming. I could feel the weight of their entitlement rolling up the mountain like a storm front. "No," I whispered to the empty air. Then I spoke into the phone, loud and clear. "Cancel the ticket. If a truck shows up at this address, I am calling the sheriff for trespassing." I hung up. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that had nothing to do with the altitude. I looked at the beautiful, expensive, empty house behind me. I thought I had bought a getaway. I was wrong. I had bought a battlefield. And the first shot had just been fired. I walked back inside from the deck and locked the heavy glass door behind me. The click of the deadbolt was a sound I had learned to love, but tonight it felt insufficient. I moved to the kitchen island and stared at the granite countertop. But I was not seeing the expensive stone. I was looking at the refrigerator door in my childhood home in Holleridge, New Hampshire. That refrigerator had been a shrine. It was a chaotic, magnetic monument to the existence of Grant Larkspur. From the time we were children, the hierarchy of the house was curated in magnets and glossy photo paper, Grant's participation ribbons for soccer, a sport he quit after 3 weeks, were displayed at eye level. His C+ spelling tests were hailed as signs of creative genius and taped up with gold stars. Photos of him muddy and grinning, holding a fishing rod or a baseball bat, covered every square inch of white enamel. My achievements were treated differently. They were not celebrated. They were filed. When I won the regional essay contest in the 8th grade, my mother read the letter, nodded once, and put it in the junk drawer next to the spare batteries and takeout menus. She told me that putting it on the fridge would clutter the aesthetic. When I graduated valedictorian, my father clapped politely and then spent the dinner toast talking about how Grant had almost made the dean's list at his community college. I learned early on that in the Larkspur household, love was a finite resource, and the market had cornered it all for my brother. The holidays were where this disparity became a physical weight. Every December, the excuses would arrive with the regularity of a utility bill. They were never cruel on the surface. They were always wrapped in the language of concern, which made them impossible to fight. I remember the year I was 22, living in a studio apartment the size of a closet in Boston. I had requested the time off work 3 months in advance. I had bought a train ticket. 2 days before Christmas, my mother called. Her voice was bright, breezy, the voice of a woman who had convinced herself she was doing a favor. She told me that Aunt Linda was coming with her 3 dogs, and the house was just going to be chaos. She said she knew how much I valued my quiet time. She said she knew I was working so hard on my career and probably needed the rest. She said, "We just assumed you would prefer to stay in the city. You are so strong. Ava, you don't need the fuss like Grant does. You are so strong." That was the weapon they used to cut me out. They complimented my resilience so they didn't have to offer me comfort, but the memory that truly hardened me, the one that turned my sadness into a cold, unbreakable resolve, happened my freshman year of university. I was 18 years old. It was my first time away from home. The dorms were emptying out, the hallways echoing with the sound of suitcases rolling toward freedom. I had packed my bag 2 days early. I was sitting on my twin bed, waiting for my dad to pick me up, when the phone rang. He told me they had decided to go to Florida last minute. He said it was a spontaneous trip to see distant cousins I had never met. He said it didn't make sense to drive 2 hours to pick me up just to turn around and drive south, and since I didn't have a ticket, it was better if I stayed on campus. He promised they would make it up to me in the spring. I spent that Christmas alone in a dorm building that had the heating turned down to save money. I ate instant noodles and watched snow fall against the brickwork of the library. I told myself it was fine. I told myself this was what being an adult looked like. Then, 2 days after Christmas, I logged onto social media. There was a photo posted by a neighbor. It was dated December 25th. It showed my parents and Grant standing in front of the fireplace in our living room in Hollow Ridge. They were wearing matching flannel pajamas. There was no Florida sun. There were no cousins. There were just the 3 of them, holding mugs of cocoa, smiling that perfect, tight family smile. They hadn't gone anywhere. They just hadn't wanted to come get me. They hadn't wanted to disrupt the trio. I was an interruption to their perfect unit, a static noise they could simply tune out. That was the day I stopped crying. The only person who saw me, truly saw me, was my grandmother, Nadine. She was my father's mother, a woman made of iron and cigarette smoke who refused to play their games. She never offered me pity. Pity was cheap. She offered me a strategy. I remember sitting on her porch the summer after the fake Florida trip. I was still angry, still leaking hurt from every pore. Nadine grabbed my chin with a hand that felt like dry paper and forced me to look at her. She told me to stop begging for a seat at a table where I was being served scraps. She told me that if I kept waiting for them to invite me in, I would spend my whole life standing on the porch. She said that family is just biology, but loyalty is a choice, and they had made theirs, so I made mine. I began to curate my solitude. If I was going to be alone, I would be alone in luxury. I stopped waiting for their calls. I stopped sending gifts that were never reciprocated. Instead, I built a new tradition. I started creating a specific atmosphere for myself, a ritual of sensory survival. I realized that the smell of pine and cinnamon triggered a Pavlovian response of rejection in my brain, reminding me of that living room in Hollow Ridge, so I banned those scents from my life. I found a new combination: ginger and cedar, sharp, spicy, grounding. Every year, on the 1st of December, I would buy the most expensive candle I could find with those notes. I would light it, and that scent would fill my apartment, signaling that this was my space, my time. I cooked elaborate dinners for one. plating filet mignon and truffle risotto on fine china I bought at estate sales. I bought myself the cashmere sweater I wanted. I bought the first edition books I craved. I turned my isolation into an art form. I taught myself that being alone did not mean being lonely. It meant being safe. It meant no one could cancel on me. No one could tell me there wasn't enough room. No one could ask me to sleep on the sofa because Grant needed the guest bed for his ego. The pain didn't go away. Exactly. It just changed. It went from a sharp, stabbing wound to a dull, heavy stone that I carried in my pocket. It became a habit. I stopped checking my phone. I stopped looking at the calendar with hope. I expected nothing. And in return, I was never disappointed. That was why I bought Ravenfall Lodge. It wasn't an investment property. It wasn't a flex to show them I had money. It was the physical manifestation of that ginger and cedar candle. It was a fortress built of timber and stone, designed to protect the peace I had painstakingly constructed over 15 years of rejection. I walked through the living room of the lodge now, the smell of the wood smoke from the fireplace mixing with the cold mountain air. I ran my hand along the back of a leather armchair I had positioned specifically to face the valley, away from the driveway, away from the world. This house was supposed to be the final step. It was supposed to be the place where I finally stopped being the daughter who was left behind in the dorm and fully became the woman who didn't need them. But as I looked at the darkened glass of the window, seeing my own reflection staring back, I realized the flaw in my plan. I had built a sanctuary, yes, but to them, I had just built a bigger, better resource. They didn't see a home. They saw an asset. And they remembered I existed only because they realized I had something they wanted to take. My job is to define who people are before they say a word. I work at Marble and Morrow Strategies in downtown Greyhaven. My official title is Brand Narrative Lead. It is a corporate way of saying that I take a company that sells socks or software and I turn them into a religion. I find the emotional hook. The story that makes a customer feel like buying a product is actually an act of self-discovery. For the last 6 months, my entire existence had been consumed by one client, Signal Ridge Outfit Company. They were a legacy outdoor gear brand that was bleeding market share to younger, cooler companies. They wanted to sell tents. I told them they needed to sell silence. My pitch was aggressive. We stripped the branding down to black and white. We removed the adrenaline junkie imagery of people hanging off cliffs and replaced it with wide, solitary shots of mountains where the human figure was just a speck. The tagline I wrote was simple: find the place where the noise stops. It worked. Fourth quarter sales exploded. On December 15th, the managing partner called me into his glass-walled office overlooking the Greyhaven harbor. He slid a thick, cream-colored envelope across the mahogany desk. Inside was a cashier's check for $92,000. It was the biggest bonus I had ever received. "There is a retention clause attached," he said, tapping a second document. "We need you for the next fiscal year. Ava, you are the only one who understands the voice." I nodded, signed the retention agreement, and took the check. He saw loyalty. I saw a literal escape hatch. For the first time, I looked at that money not as a deposit for a future retirement, but as immediate ammunition. That night, my team dragged me out. Mina, Drew, and Tori, these were the people who actually knew what my coffee order was. They knew I hated loud noises and that I worked through lunch to avoid making small talk in the break room. We went to a dimly lit speakeasy downtown. Drew raised his glass of bourbon. "To the woman who made loneliness profitable," he toasted, grinning. We laughed. It was warm. It was easy. I looked around the booth at their flushed, happy faces and realized that this was what family was supposed to feel like. It wasn't an obligation. It wasn't a transaction. It was just people who liked being in the same room as you. I went home alone that night, buzzing with a slight alcohol hum and the adrenaline of the win. I sat on my couch in my pristine, quiet apartment and opened my laptop. I didn't open my work email. I opened a real estate aggregator. I typed in Pinevale. I didn't know why I chose that town. Maybe because it was 2 hours away, just far enough to be inconvenient for a casual drop-in. Maybe because the elevation was high enough that the air felt different. I scrolled past the sensible cabins. I scrolled past the A-frames near the ski slopes. And then I saw it. Ravenfall Lodge. It was located on Frostline Summit Road. The cover photo wasn't of the front door. It was a shot taken from the back deck at sunrise. The house was essentially a glass prism anchored into the granite face of the mountain. It looked like a watchtower. It looked cold, sharp, and impenetrable. The description mentioned radiant floor heating, a slate roof, and a view that looked down onto a sea of clouds. The price was steep, but with the $92,000 sitting in my bag and my savings, I could make the down payment without blinking. The monthly mortgage would be tight, but I could manage it. It was 1:17 in the morning. I clicked the contact agent button, expecting an automated reply. 2 minutes later, my phone rang. I stared at it. Who calls at this hour? I answered, wary. Hello? Eva. The voice was a woman's, raspy and amused. This is Ren Calder. I'm the listing agent for Ravenfall. I saw your inquiry come through. It is 1 in the morning, I said. City people dream after midnight. Ren replied. I could hear the flick of a lighter in the background. And mountain people stay up to watch the bears. You want the house? I haven't seen it, I said. I can FaceTime you tomorrow, she said. But I will tell you this. It has been on the market for 48 hours. I have 3 viewings scheduled for Saturday. If you want it, you need to be aggressive. I looked at the photos again. The great room with the stone fireplace. The master bath with the soaking tub that faced the tree line. I didn't call my mother to ask if she liked the location. I didn't call my father to ask him to review the inspection report. I didn't call Grant to ask if there was enough room for his ego. I closed my eyes and asked myself a single question. Can I be alone in that house and feel safe? The answer rose up in my chest, instant and undeniable. Yes, I want it, I told Ren. But I have conditions. I'm listening, she said. I don't want my name on the public deed, I said. My voice was all business now, the same tone I used when negotiating contracts for Signal Ridge. I want to purchase it through an entity. Smart, Ren said. Privacy is the ultimate luxury up here. The next morning, before I even poured my coffee, I was on the Secretary of State website. I filed the paperwork to form a limited liability company. I needed a name that sounded generic, something that wouldn't flag a search alert if my father decided to Google me. I thought of the scent I loved. I thought of the broker who picked up the phone at midnight. Cedar Wren Holdings, LLC. I rented a PEO box at the Pinevale Post Office immediately. I routed all the closing documents, the insurance, and the utility bills to that box. I made sure that if anyone searched the county property records for Eva Larkspur, they would find absolutely nothing. I signed the papers electronically 3 days later. I wired the money. I felt a strange, terrifying thrill as the confirmation hit my inbox. I had just erased myself from the grid. I had created a ghost entity to hold my life. I thought I was being paranoid. I thought I was being overly dramatic. But as I sat in my office at Marble and Morrow, watching the snow start to fall outside the window, I knew I wasn't protecting an investment. I was building a perimeter. I just didn't realize that a perimeter is only as strong as the person guarding the gate, and I was about to let the enemy walk right through the front door with a smile and a moving truck. But in that moment, staring at the LLC registration document on my screen, I felt a surge of power. I wasn't Eva the daughter, or Eva the sister, or Eva the employee. I was the managing member of Cedar Wren Holdings. And for the first time in my life, I held the keys to a kingdom that no one else knew existed, or so I thought. I closed my laptop, packed my bag, and walked out of the office. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. I just walked into the elevator, pressed the button for the lobby, and watched the numbers count down. It felt like a countdown to launch. I drove straight to the bank to get a cashier's check for the closing costs. The teller asked me what I was buying. Freedom, I said. She laughed, thinking I was joking. I didn't smile back. I took the check, got in my car, and pointed it toward the mountains. I left the city of Greyhaven in my rearview mirror. For 2 hours, I pretended that I was the only person left on Earth. When I finally turned onto Frostline Summit Road, the sun was setting. The house rose up from the rock, like it had grown there. It was dark, silent, and imposing. I keyed in the temporary code on the lockbox, and the heavy front door swung open. I stepped inside. The silence was absolute. It was heavy. It was beautiful. I stood in the center of the great room and breathed in. It smelled of sawdust and cold stone. It didn't smell like ginger and cedar yet, but it would. This was mine. I didn't know then that the clock was already ticking. I didn't know that my calculated silence had a leak. I just knew that for this one night, I was the queen of a silent mountain. I unpacked my single bag, set up my laptop on the kitchen island, and prepared to start my life over. Then I walked out onto the deck to take that picture. The picture that would ruin everything. The picture that would turn my corporate stronghold into a family spectacle. But standing there in the dark, before the flash went off, before the notifications started, I felt something I hadn't felt since I was a child. I felt hope. It was a dangerous thing to feel in my family. And as I would soon find out, hope is the first thing they look to destroy. I treated the possession of Ravenfall Lodge not as a move, but as an occupation. I did not hire a fleet of trucks to haul the accumulation of my 34 years up the mountain. I did not want the clutter of my old life to contaminate the new one. I packed my SUV with military precision. 2 suitcases of clothes, my espresso machine, a box of books, my bedding, and the ginger and cedar candles. That was it. When I drove up the winding gravel driveway, the tires crunching on the frost-hardened earth, I felt lighter than I had in a decade. Walking into the house with just a single box in my arms felt like a reclamation. The house was 4,000 square feet of empty space. My footsteps echoed on the wide plank oak floors, a sharp, lonely sound that bounced off the vaulted ceilings. To anyone else, the emptiness might have felt cold. To me, it felt like oxygen. For the first time, the weight of responsibility, the mortgage, the property taxes, the maintenance did not feel like a burden I was carrying for someone else. It felt like a foundation I was pouring for myself. The first thing I did was not unpack. I secured the perimeter. I had stopped at a hardware store in Pine Vale on the way up. I carried a tool bag into the foyer and went to work on the front door. The existing lock was a standard contractor-grade deadbolt, the kind that looked nice but offered no real resistance. I unscrewed the strike plate, the metal piece on the door frame where the bolt enters. It was held in place by tiny half-inch screws. A strong kick would have ripped it right out of the wood. I threw the short screws into the trash. I replaced them with 3-inch hardened steel screws that bit deep into the stud behind the frame. I drove them in with a power drill, the whining mechanical shriek satisfying in the quiet house. I replaced the lock with a high-end smart lock that required a keypad code or a biometric scan from my phone. I did the same for the side door and the back slider. Then I mounted the cameras. I placed one facing the driveway, wide enough to catch license plates, one on the front porch, one covering the side gate that led to the propane tanks. I synced them all to a central hub and set the notifications to alert me instantly. I enabled a feature called the access log, which recorded every unlock attempt down to the second. It might have seemed paranoid for a house in a quiet mountain town, but I knew something the previous owners did not. I wasn't trying to keep out burglars. I was trying to keep out entitlement. Once the physical barriers were up, I established the psychological ones. I sat on the floor of the empty kitchen and drafted a mental guest policy. It was strict, no drop-ins. No, I was just in the neighborhood visits. Access would be granted only by written invitation with specified start and end times. It was cold. It was corporate. It was exactly what was necessary. The next 2 days were a blur of labor. I chose the room with the best view of the valley to be my office. It had north-facing windows that let in a steady, even light. I bought 5 gallons of paint, a deep, slate blue that looked like a storm cloud. I spent hours rolling the paint onto the walls, my arms aching, my hair tied back in a messy bun. I smelled of latex and dust, and I loved it. I set up my desk right in front of the glass. This would be where I worked. This would be where I breathed. By Saturday, the house was still sparse, but it had a pulse. I invited Mina, Drew, and Tori up for the day to test the joy. As Mina put it, I needed to know if the house could hold laughter, or if it was just a monument to silence. They arrived at noon with bags of groceries and expensive wine. When they walked in, their reactions were visceral. Tori spun around in the great room, looking up at the exposed beams. Drew walked straight to the window and let out a low whistle. "Ava," Mina said, grabbing my arm, "you didn't buy a house. You bought a villain's lair. It is incredible." We cooked dinner on the portable camping stove I had brought, because the gas range wasn't hooked up yet. We sat on the floor of the living room on blankets, eating pasta out of paper bowls, drinking Cabernet from crystal glasses I had found in a cabinet. The sound of our laughter rose up and filled the cavernous space. It didn't echo hollowly anymore. It stuck to the walls. "To the fortress," Drew toasted, raising his glass. "To the fortress," we echoed. For the first time, I felt a warmth that didn't come from the heating system. This was my family. These were the people who celebrated my wins without asking for a cut of the prize money. After they left, driving down the mountain in a convoy of taillights, I felt a profound sense of peace. I was alone, but I wasn't lonely. I picked up my phone and FaceTimed my grandmother. Nadine answered on the second ring. She was sitting in her armchair in the nursing home, a cigarette unlit in her hand because the nurses wouldn't let her smoke inside. She squinted at the screen. "Show me," she demanded. I walked her through the house, holding the phone up to show the high beams, the slate blue office, the heavy new locks on the doors. I walked out onto the deck and showed her the stars, which looked bright enough to touch. She watched in silence, her sharp eyes taking it all in. When I turned the camera back to my face, she nodded once. "You did it," she said, her voice gravelly. "You finally stopped waiting for them to give you a room, and you built your own mountain." "Do you think they will be angry?" I asked, the old fear creeping in. "Oh, honey," Nadine chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "They are going to be furious. People hate it when the appliance they use starts thinking for itself. Lock those doors, Eva." "I did," I said. "Good. Sleep tight." She hung up. I stood on the deck, the cold air biting at my cheeks. I felt invincible. The house was secure. The deed was hidden. My soul felt settled. I made a cup of tea and sat by the gas fireplace I had finally managed to turn on. The flames danced behind the glass. I felt a surge of pride so overwhelming it made my chest ache. I wanted to capture it. I wanted to mark this moment in time. I took 3 photos, one of the views from the deck, the mist rolling over the pines, one of the fireplace, glowing warm and inviting, one of my hands holding the mug of tea, with the slate blue wall of my office in the background. I opened my social media app. I selected the 3 photos. I didn't tag the location. I didn't tag anyone. I just wrote a caption that felt true. Finally home. I hit the post. I watched the upload bar complete. I turned off my phone, leaving it on the kitchen island, and went to sleep in the master bedroom on a mattress on the floor. I slept deeply, dreamlessly, the sleep of the righteous. I woke up the next morning to the sun streaming across the floorboards. I stretched, feeling the soreness in my shoulders from the painting. I walked to the kitchen, humming to myself, and picked up my phone to check the time. The screen was full. There were 42 notifications. The first one was a screenshot of my post, sent into the family group chat by a cousin I hadn't spoken to in 3 years. Then came the messages. My mother, Kwa Dung Luk, perfect timing. My father, acquiring a major asset requires family consultation. Grant, the green checkmark. My stomach dropped. The peace of the last 48 hours evaporated instantly, replaced by the cold, hard realization of what I had done. I hadn't just posted a picture, I had sent up a flare. I unlocked my phone and saw the timestamps. They had been discussing it for hours while I slept. They had already looked up the town based on the visual cues in the photos. They had already decided, and then, as I stood there, frozen, the phone rang. It wasn't a family member. It was the moving company. The takeover had begun. I did not scream. I did not throw the phone. I didn't even cry. Ava, who cried in her dorm room at 18, was gone. The Eva who stood in that kitchen was a woman who had just successfully rebranded a failing company by rewriting its narrative. I looked at the screen, and I didn't see a family. I saw a hostile corporate takeover. The messages kept rolling in, creating a momentum that was designed to be unstoppable. My mother, Maris, updated the group chat name to Larkspur Christmas the Lodge. She sent a message that wasn't a question. It was a directive. Christmas this year is at Ravenfall Lodge. It is decided. I will bring the ham. Ava, make sure the guest rooms have fresh linens. Grant needs the one with the attached bath for Callie. It was decided. Passive voice. As if the decision had come down from a higher power. Not her own desire to play hostess in a house she didn't own. Then my father's private message pinged. Ava, this property must serve the common interest. You have a responsibility to the family. You need to be useful. Useful. That was the word that snagged in my throat. Not loved, not valued. Useful. Like a spare generator or a fold-out couch. Then came the visual confirmation from Grant. A photo of a cardboard box sealed with packing tape. On the side, written in thick black marker, was the word nursery. Underneath it, he had typed 3 words, "See you Friday." I took a deep breath, the old instinct to explain, to apologize, to say I can't this weekend, but maybe next month flared up. It would be so easy to soften the blow. It would be so easy to negotiate, but negotiation implies that the other party has a valid claim. They didn't. I switched apps. I didn't reply. Instead, I started screenshotting. I captured every text. I captured the timestamps. I went into my call log and screenshotted the missed call from Summit Logistics. I created a new folder in my cloud drive named Security Compliance and uploaded everything. This wasn't a disagreement anymore. It was evidence. My phone rang again. It was Nadine. "They are packing the car." "Ava," she rasped, skipping the hello. "Your mother is already telling the neighbors about the family estate in the mountains. She is building a story." "I told them no," I said. "They don't hear no," Nadine said. "They hear try harder. They will come whether you invite them or not. They are banking on the fact that you are too polite to leave them standing in the snow. Do not open that door." "I won't," I said. "Good. Get a lawyer. A real one. Not that nice boy in the city who handles your parking tickets. Get a shark." I hung up and opened my laptop. I searched for legal counsel in Pinevale. I needed someone local, someone who knew the sheriff, someone who wouldn't be impressed by my father's bluster. I found Pike and Ledger Legal. Their website was sparse, just a phone number and an address on Main Street. I called. 30 minutes later, I was sitting across from Rowan Pike. He was a man in his 50s with a face like a topographic map and eyes that had seen every kind of property dispute in the county. He listened to me for 10 minutes without interrupting. He looked at the screenshots. He looked at the deed for Cedar Wren Holdings. "This isn't a family visit," Rowan said, leaning back in his chair. "This is a pattern of asset seizure. They are establishing residency. If they move furniture in, if they receive mail there, if they spend a certain number of nights in this state, they can claim tenancy rights. It is a nightmare to evict a family member once they have a toothbrush in the bathroom." My blood ran cold. "They want to move in. Your brother has a baby coming," Rowan said. "Your mother says it's for the holidays. I guarantee you, by January 2nd, they will be explaining why it makes sense for Grant to stay just until the baby is born, and then just until he finds a job. You need to stop this at the perimeter." "What do I do?" I asked. "We filed a no trespass notice," Rowan said. "Formally, issued by the LLC, we name Elliot, Maris, and Grant Larkspur specifically. We serve them electronically and by certified mail to their current address. It draws a legal line in the sand. If they cross it, it is not a family squabble. It is a crime." "Do it," I said. Rowan drafted the document. It was brutal in its clarity. Notice against trespass. The following individuals are prohibited from entering the premises of 14 Frostline Summit Road. I left his office with a copy of the notice and a new sense of mission. I went back to the lodge and turned it into a fortress. I pulled up the defense map I had sketched out. Cameras active. I adjusted the sensitivity on the driveway sensor so a squirrel wouldn't trip it, but a car would trigger an instant alert. Locks, I checked the logs. No activity. I changed the master code just in case. Utilities, I logged into the power and water accounts. I set up two-factor authentication on everything, linking it to an authenticator app on my phone, not my text messages. I added a verbal password to the account for phone support Ginger Cedar. No one could call and pretend to be me to shut off the power or add a name to the bill. Mail, I went to the USPS website and put a freeze on any change of address requests for my name or the LLC. Finally, I sat down at my desk to send the email. I didn't send it from my personal Gmail. I created a new address, admin.starinholdings.com. I didn't address it to Mom and Dad. I addressed it to the list of trespassers. Subject notice of non-authorization regarding 14 Frostline Summit Road. I wrote, this email serves as formal notification that the property located at 14 Frostline Summit Road is owned and managed by Cedar Wren Holdings LLC. The property is currently closed to all unauthorized visitors. No invitations have been extended for the holiday season. Any prior communications implying access are null and void. The arrival of movers or personal property will be treated as unauthorized dumping and trespassing. Please find attached the formal notice against trespass filed with local council. Regards, Eva Larkspur, Managing Member. Cedar Wren Holdings, LLC. IBCC'd Rowan Pike. I read it over. It was cold. It was devoid of any emotion. It was exactly the tone of a stranger. I hit send. My hand was shaking. Not from fear, but from the sheer adrenaline of finally, after 30 years, changing the script. I wasn't begging them to respect me. I was legislating it. I waited. The response was immediate, but it wasn't a reply to the email. My phone rang. It was my mother. I let it go to voicemail. Then my father. Voicemail. Then Grant. Voicemail. Then a text from my mother popped up, bypassing the corporate wall I had tried to build. Eva, stop playing games. This is ridiculous. We are family. You can't sue your parents. We are coming on Friday, and we expect you to be reasonable. Don't make a scene. I didn't reply. I just forwarded the screenshot to Rowan. Don't make a scene. That was their mantra. But they didn't realize that I wasn't making a scene. I was making a case, and I was ready for them. The alert came on December 23rd at 7:48 in the evening. It was not Friday. They had arrived 2 days early. I was in the kitchen, boiling water for tea, when the iPad mounted on the wall lit up with a stark red border. The motion sensors at the bottom of the driveway had been tripped. I walked over to the screen, my socks sliding silently on the hardwood, and tapped the live feed. The night vision camera turned the world into shades of spectral gray and white. I watched as a convoy crawled up my gravel driveway. Leading the pack was my father's black SUV. Following close behind was a rental box truck, the kind you rent by the hour for local moves. They were not visiting. They were invading. I felt a cold wash of adrenaline flood my system, sharpening my vision. I didn't feel panic. I felt a grim, dark satisfaction. I had predicted this. I had built the castle walls because I knew the siege was coming. I watched them park. The SUV doors opened. My father, Elliot, stepped out first, looking up at the house with an air of proprietary annoyance. Then my mother, Maris, then Grant, helping his pregnant wife, Callie, out of the back seat. They started unloading immediately. Suitcases, a portable crib. But then 2 other people stepped out of the SUV, and the blood in my veins turned to ice. One was a man in a nondescript work jacket carrying a heavy canvas tool bag. He didn't look like a mover. He moved with the efficient, predatory gait of someone who opens things that do not want to be opened. The second person was a woman in a beige coat clutching a leather portfolio. She stood awkwardly by the hood of the car, looking out of place in the mountain cold. I zoomed in on the feed. Clipped to her coat was a lanyard. Even in the grainy black and white, I recognized the shape of the ID. She was a mobile notary. The realization hit me like a physical blow. They hadn't just brought a locksmith to break in. They had brought a notary to legalize the theft. They intended to put a document in front of me, a power of attorney, a deed transfer, a residency agreement, and force me to sign it under duress, with a witness present to stamp it and make it binding. This wasn't a family holiday. This was a hostile acquisition disguised as a reunion. I walked to the intercom panel by the front door. My hand hovered over the button, on the screen. I saw the group moving up the front steps. The man with the tool bag was already inspecting the smart lock I had installed. I pressed the talk button. My voice boomed out of the speaker on the porch, loud and distorted by the cold air. "Unauthorized," I said. "Leave now." On the screen, they all jumped. My mother recovered first. She looked directly into the camera lens, her face composing itself into a mask of tragic concern. She wasn't speaking to me. She was performing for the notary and the locksmith. "Ava, honey?" she called out, her voice pitching up into a theatrical wobble. "It is Mom. We know you are not feeling well. We know you are having one of your episodes. We are just here to help you get settled. Open the door so we can take care of you." It was a masterclass in gaslighting. She was painting a narrative in real time: the unstable daughter, the concerned parents, the necessary intervention. "I am the sole owner of this property through Cedar Wren Holdings," I said, keeping my voice flat and monotone. "You have been served a notice against trespass. If you touch that door, you are committing a felony." My father stepped forward, his face darkening. "Cut the nonsense. Eva, it is 20 degrees out here. We have a pregnant woman. Open this damn door before I take it off the hinges." He nodded to the man with the tool bag. The man didn't hesitate. He pulled a heavy-duty drill from his bag. The sound of the motor revving whined through the thick wood of the door, a high-pitched scream that vibrated in my teeth. This was the declaration of war. He pressed the drill bit against the lock cylinder. I backed away from the door. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed the direct line for the sheriff's department, the number Rowan Pike had given me. "Dispatch," a woman's voice answered. "This is Eva Larkspur, managing member of Cedar Wren Holdings," I said. I was pacing the foyer, watching the door handle vibrate as the drill bit chewed into the metal. "I have an active trespass in progress at 14 Frostline Summit Road. Case file number 792 Alpha. I have 5 individuals attempting to breach the perimeter. One is armed with burglary tools and is currently drilling my front lock. We have the file on screen. Ms. Larkspur," the dispatcher said, her tone shifting from routine to urgent. "Deputy Miller is already on Frostline Road. He is 2 minutes out." "They are drilling the lock," I repeated, my voice shaking slightly now. The sound was deafening. The door frame shuddered, but the 3-inch steel screws I had driven into the studs held fast. The strike plate refused to yield. "Stay away from the door," the dispatcher ordered. "Do not engage." I stood in the hallway, watching the heavy oak door. It was the only thing separating my carefully constructed sanctuary from the chaos of my past. I could hear my father shouting instructions outside. "Harder. Push harder." Then, blue light flooded the frosted glass of the transom window. The drilling stopped instantly. I moved back to the iPad to watch the feed. A sheriff's cruiser had pulled up right behind the rental truck, blocking them in. Deputy Miller stepped out. He was a large man, wearing a thick winter patrol jacket, his hand resting casually but alertly near his belt. He didn't walk up like a neighbor. He walked up like an officer approaching a crime scene. "Step away from the door," Miller barked. "Drop the tools. Now." The locksmith dropped the drill. It clattered onto the frozen porch. He raised his hands, backing away quickly. "I was hired for a lockout service," he stammered. "They showed me IDs, said it was their daughter's place." Deputy Miller ignored him and turned to my father. "Sir, step back down the stairs. All of you." "This is a misunderstanding," my father started, using his boardroom voice, the one that usually made subordinates crumble. "My daughter is inside. She is mentally unwell. We are conducting a welfare check." I have a signed affidavit from the property owner and a notice against trespass on file for everyone in this family, Miller said, cutting him off. He shone his flashlight onto the porch, illuminating the notary who was trying to shrink into the shadows. The beam of light caught the notary's seal press in her hand. "And you brought a notary for a welfare check?" Miller asked. His voice was dripping with cynicism. "That is a new one. This is not a family dispute. Sir, this is attempted burglary and harassment." My mother tried to step in, tears already glistening on her cheeks. "Officer, please. Her brother is having a baby. We just wanted to be together for Christmas." "Ma'am, you are drilling into a stranger's house as far as the law is concerned," Miller said. "Cedar Wren Holdings has denied you access. You have 5 minutes to get these vehicles off this mountain, or I am arresting every single one of you for criminal trespass and destruction of property." He turned to the notary. "And if I were you, I would leave before I asked to see your commission log." The notary didn't wait. She bolted for the SUV, slipping on the ice in her haste. She knew exactly how illegal this looked. Grant stood by the railing. He hadn't said a word the entire time. He looked up at the camera lens, knowing I was watching. His face was twisted in a mask of pure, impotent rage. He wasn't mad that he missed a holiday. He was mad that the resource he felt entitled to had finally developed a firewall he couldn't charm his way through. "Let's go," Grant spat at our father. "She called the cops on us. She is dead to me." "Move it," Deputy Miller ordered. I watched them retreat. It was a chaotic, humiliating shuffle. The locksmith threw his tools into the back of his truck and reversed down the driveway blindly. My father slammed the SUV door so hard the chassis shook. My mother was still looking back at the house, her face a portrait of disbelief. She couldn't process that her narrative had been overruled by a legal statute. They drove away. The red taillights disappeared around the bend of the mountain. Deputy Miller walked up to the camera. He tipped his hat. "They are gone. Ms. Larkspur, I will sit at the bottom of the road for an hour to make sure they don't circle back." "Thank you," I whispered, though he couldn't hear me. I slumped against the wall of the foyer. My legs gave out, and I slid down until I was sitting on the cold floor. My hands were trembling so hard I couldn't unclench them. The adrenaline was leaving my body in painful, jagged waves. The door was scarred. There were deep gouges in the wood around the lock where the drill had slipped. But it was closed. The house was silent again. The only sound was the wind howling through the valley and the jagged rhythm of my own breathing. I had held the line. I had survived the first wave. But as I looked at the damage on the door, I knew this wasn't over. They had retreated. But they hadn't surrendered. They would just change tactics. They would stop trying to break the door and start trying to break me. Christmas morning broke over the mountain with a blinding, pristine whiteness that usually belongs on a greeting card. Inside Ravenfall Lodge, the silence was absolute. I did not have a tree. I did not have stockings hung by the chimney. I sat at my slate blue desk with a cup of black coffee and a laptop, monitoring the only fireplace that mattered, the internet. They had retreated physically, but I knew my mother well enough to know she would not let a sheriff's deputy ruin her holiday aesthetic. If she could not occupy the house, she would occupy the narrative. At 9 a.m, the notification popped up. It was a Facebook post from Maris Larkspur. She had tagged herself in the mountains of Pine Vale, a location vague enough to be safe but specific enough to let everyone know she was exactly where she claimed she would be. The photo was a masterpiece of deception. It was a tight shot of Grant and Callie taken. I realized with a jolt, in the back seat of the SUV before they were kicked off my property the night before, but cropped and filtered, it looked like they were sitting in a cozy, sunlit room. The caption read, "A Christmas miracle, after so much uncertainty. Grant and Callie finally have a safe place to start their family. We are so blessed to provide this sanctuary for the new baby. God is good." I stared at the screen. She hadn't mentioned me. She hadn't mentioned the house, but she had used the word provide. It implied ownership. It implied that they were the benefactors, the noble patriarchs securing a future for their golden child. The comments rolled in like a landslide of validation. "You are such amazing parents," wrote a neighbor. "They deserve it. wrote my aunt. So glad they are settled before the baby comes, wrote the pastor's wife. It was a public victory lap for a race they had been disqualified from. Then came a direct message from a friend I hadn't spoken to since high school. A woman named Sarah, who now worked the front desk at the Greyhaven Country Club. "Hey Eva," the message read, "I know we haven't talked in ages, but something weird happened at the club last night. Your dad was at the bar, buying rounds. He was telling anyone who would listen that he is managing a difficult tenant situation at a new property up north. He was showing people parcel data on his phone. Like, reading out the acreage and the zoning codes. It felt possessive. Just thought you should know." My stomach twisted. Managing a tenant, that was their new angle. I wasn't the owner who had locked them out. I was the erratic occupant they were graciously tolerating. I switched tabs to the county portal. If my father was reading parcel data, he wasn't just bragging, he was looking for loopholes. I logged into the portal for the Pine Vale Post Office, checking the digital dashboard for my P.O. box. I had set it up to receive alerts for any changes. There was a red flag on the dashboard. Pending request. I clicked it. My breath caught in my throat. A request had been submitted at 4 a.m. to forward mail for Grant Larkspur and Callie Larkspur to P.O. Box 492. My box? The box registered to Cedar Wren Holdings. They weren't just trying to steal my mail. They were trying to establish a paper trail. If they could get a government letter or a bank statement delivered to my address, they could walk into a court and claim they lived there. They could claim that I had locked them out of their own residence. In the eyes of the law, a piece of mail is often stronger than a deed. I immediately denied the request, marking it as fraudulent, but my hands were shaking. They were attacking the digital infrastructure of my life. I picked up the phone and called Rowan Pike. It was Christmas Day. I didn't care. "They are trying to forward mail," I said as soon as he answered. "I know," Rowan said. His voice was grim. "I was about to call you. I have an alert set up on the county clerk's filing system. Something was uploaded late last night via the emergency drop box." "What is it?" I asked. "A document titled Family Occupancy Agreement," Rowan said. "It is dated 3 weeks ago. It outlines a verbal contract stating that Cedar Wren Holdings agrees to lease the property to Grant Larkspur for a period of 12 months in exchange for maintenance and familial care." "I never signed that," I said, my voice rising. "I never even spoke to them about it." "I know you didn't," Rowan replied calmly, "because the Eva Larkspur who signed it used a middle initial. The signature reads Eva J. Larkspur." I froze. "I don't have a middle name." "Exactly," Rowan said. "They forged it, and they were sloppy. They likely used J because your mother's middle name is June, and in their panic to manufacture evidence, they projected her identity onto yours." "This is fraud," I whispered. "It is worse than fraud," Rowan said. "It is a clumsy, desperate attempt to overwrite reality, but we are going to use it. They just handed us the smoking gun." While we were on the phone, another email pinged into my inbox. This one was from the Pinevale Utility District. Subject confirmation of account update request. I opened it. The text read, "Dear customer, we have received your request to add Elliot Larkspur as a secondary authorized user on your electric and water accounts due to the primary account holder's medical inability to manage affairs. Please click here to finalize." I felt a surge of bile rise in my throat. Medical inability, that was the narrative. They weren't just stealing the house. They were building a case that I was incompetent. They were telling the utility company, and likely anyone else who would listen, that Eva was overwhelmed, unstable, or sick. They were positioning themselves not as thieves, but as conservators stepping in to save the day. It was the ultimate gaslight. They were trying to pathologize my independence so they could strip it away. "Rowan," I said, my voice turning deadly cold. "They just tried to put my father on the electric bill. They are claiming I am medically unfit." "Okay," Rowan said. I could hear the sound of typing on a mechanical keyboard. "The gloves are coming off. I am drafting a cease and desist, but it is going to be more than a warning. It is going to be a catalog of felonies." "List everything," I said. "I will," he promised. I am listing the attempted burglary, the forgery of the occupancy agreement, the mail fraud, and the impersonation of an account holder with the utility board. I'm sending this to them. But I'm also sending a fraud alert packet to every institution in this county. What does that do? It locks the system down, Rowan explained. The post office, the DMV, the utility companies, the tax assessor. We are going to put a flag on your file that requires a photo ID and a legal password for any modification. If your father calls the water company again, they won't just say no. They will flag the call for law enforcement. I hung up the phone and looked out the window at the snow-covered valley. It was beautiful, but it felt distant. For years, I thought my family just wanted my compliance. I thought they just wanted me to show up, smile, and hand over my achievements to Grant. But today, looking at the fake signature with the phantom middle initial, reading the lie about my medical inability, I realized the truth was far darker. They didn't just want the house. The house was just wood and stone. They wanted the story. They couldn't tolerate a version of reality where I was the successful owner and they were the guests. It disrupted the hierarchy. In their world, Grant had to be the hero. My parents had to be the benevolent rulers, and I had to be the supporting character who needed their help. If I didn't fit that role, they would rewrite the script until I did. They would forge my name, pathologize my mind, and steal my mail just to force me back into the box they had built for me in Holleridge. I sat back in my chair. The anger that had been burning hot all morning suddenly cooled into something solid and heavy, like a weapon. "You want a story?" I whispered to the empty room. "I will give you a story." I opened the folder on my laptop where I had stored the video of the locksmith drilling my door. I renamed the file Exhibit A. They wanted to play make-believe on Facebook. I was preparing for a court of law. And unlike their Christmas miracle, my evidence didn't need a filter to look real. The snow was different at the bottom of the mountain. It was slushier, gray with road grit, and perfect for hiding tracks. After the digital assault on Christmas Day, I realized that blocking them online was not enough. They were desperate, and desperate people do not stay behind screens. They try to manifest their lies in the physical world. I knew they were staying at a motel in Pinevale. I knew they were stewing in a room that smelled of industrial cleaner and resentment, plotting their next move. So, on the afternoon of December 28th, I drove down to the cluster of mailboxes that served the residents of Frostline Summit Road. It was a heavy steel unit bolted to concrete. Standing under a small timber shelter, I did not just check my mail. I hiked 20 feet into the dense scrub oak and pine facing the mailboxes. I strapped a high-definition trail camera to the trunk of a tree. It was wrapped in a bark-textured casing, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. I set the motion sensitivity to high and synced it to the cloud via a cellular uplink. I drew a digital geofence around the pavement in front of the boxes. If anyone lingered there for more than 30 seconds, I would know. I spent the next 24 hours waiting. The silence in the lodge was heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. Then, on December 30th, at 2:13 in the morning, the alert shattered the quiet. My phone, resting on the nightstand, emitted the sharp, discordant chime I had assigned to the perimeter breach. I rolled over, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, and grabbed the device. The notification read, "Motion detected, Zone B, mail cluster." I tapped the screen. The live feed is loaded, grainy and monochromatic in the infrared night vision. A car had pulled up to the mailboxes. It wasn't the black SUV from the driveway incident. It was a sedan, likely a rental, meant to be inconspicuous. The engine was running, the exhaust puffing white clouds into the freezing air. The driver's door opened. A figure stepped out. He was wearing a heavy wool coat and a hat pulled low. But I knew the walk. I knew the hunch of the shoulders. It was Elliot Larkspur, my father. I watched, frozen in my bed, as he looked left, then right, checking for witnesses. The road was empty. The world was asleep. He thought he was invisible. He walked up to the steel unit. He pulled a ring of keys from his pocket, a tension wrench, and a rake tool, or maybe a master key he had acquired illicitly. He wasn't picking the lock. He was jamming something into the slot. He held a thick manila envelope in his gloved hand. He shoved the envelope through the outgoing slot, then paused. He reached into his coat and pulled out a second stack of loose papers. He began stuffing them into the slot for my specific box unit, forcing them through the narrow gap with a violent, frantic energy. He wasn't stealing mail this time. He was planting it. He stood there for another 10 seconds, adjusting his hat, breathing hard. Then he got back in the car and drove away. The entire clip lasted 3 minutes. I didn't go back to sleep. I lay there staring at the ceiling, feeling a cold, sick realization settle in my gut. This wasn't just a family trying to visit. This was a calculated operation to frame me. At 6 in the morning, as soon as the sun crested the ridge, I drove down to the boxes. The air was 5 degrees. My breath hung in front of me as I unlocked my unit. It was jammed full. I pulled out the papers. My hands were trembling, not from the cold, but from the sheer insanity of what I was holding. I took them back to the car and spread them out on the passenger seat to document them. I snapped a photo of each page, ensuring the metadata would log the time and location. They were affidavits, sworn statements, typed up on professional letterhead, but unsigned by any notary. Affidavit of residency. The first one read, I, Elliot Larkspur, acting as property manager for Cedar Wren Holdings, hereby attest that Grant and Callie Larkspur are the primary residents of the domicile at 14 Frostline Summit Road. Primary residence. I picked up the next sheet. It was a letter addressed to an entity that made me laugh out loud, a sharp, hysterical bark in the empty car. To the board of the Ravenfall Estates. Homeowners Association. There was no homeowners association. Ravenfall Lodge was on a private road. There was no board. There were no dues. My father had fabricated an entire governing body just so he could write a letter to them, dated 2 weeks prior, apologizing for the confusion regarding the gate access and confirming that his son had full rights of ingress and egress. He was writing letters to ghosts. He was building a paper trail that led to nowhere, hoping that if he generated enough volume, the sheer weight of the paperwork would crush the truth. I looked at the last document. It was a fake lease agreement. It listed the rent as $0. It listed the term as indefinite. And at the bottom, there was that signature again, Eva J. Larkspur. I felt a profound sense of violation. He had stood in the dark at 2 a.m, stuffing lies into a metal box, believing that this would somehow make him the patriarch again. He believed that if he could just create enough paper, he could overwrite my ownership. I uploaded the video clip from the trail cam. I uploaded the photos of the documents. I compiled them into a folder named Evidence of Fraud. I called Rowan Pike at 7:15. I have video of him planting evidence, I said, and I have the documents. Send it, Rowan said. His voice was thick with sleep, but it sharpened instantly. All of it. I forwarded the files. I could hear him clicking through them on the other end. He created a fake HOA, Rowan asked, incredulity seeping into his tone. That is pathological. It is desperate, I said. It is criminal, Rowan corrected. Eva, this changes the complexion of the case. We are no longer looking at a civil dispute over access. We are looking at manufacturing false evidence, mail tampering, and intent to defraud. I am filing an emergency motion for a protective order. I am attaching the video. I am attaching the fake affidavits. What does that mean? It means it goes to a judge today, Rowan said. We are bypassing the waiting period. If they come within 500 feet of you or the property, they will be arrested on site. No warnings, no discussions. File it, I said. I drove back up the mountain. The envelope of lies sat on the seat beside me like a radioactive isotope. I wanted to burn it. I wanted to throw it into the fireplace and watch the flames consume their delusions, but I couldn't. It was evidence. I locked the documents in the safe in my office. At noon, Rowan texted me, motion filed. The judge is reviewing. We should have the order by tomorrow. The noose was tightening. I had the law, the evidence, and the high ground. But they had one last weapon. At 4 o'clock that afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my mother. I stared at the preview. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't a guilt trip. It was a threat, veiled in the language of a disappointed parent. "We tried the nice way," she wrote. "You left us no choice." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the drafty window. They weren't stopping. The fake documents were just the setup. The nice way was the forgery. The nice way was the break-in. If that was their version of nice, I was terrified to see what they considered necessary. I didn't type a reply. I didn't ask what she meant. I took a screenshot. I forwarded it to Rowan with a single note. "Add this to the file." Then I went to the closet and took out the heavy flashlight and the bear spray. I placed them on the kitchen island. I checked the cameras. I checked the locks. Night was falling on the mountain, and for the first time, I wasn't just guarding a house. I was waiting for a siege. Nadine had given me one final piece of advice during our morning call. "Bullies hate an audience," she rasped. "If they are coming to take the house, they will want to do it in the dark, where they can twist your words. Turn the lights on. Ava, fill the room." I listened. For New Year's Eve. I didn't barricade myself inside alone with a bottle of wine and a baseball bat. I threw a party. I invited Mina and Drew from the city. I invited Lena and Wyatt, the couple who lived in the A-frame down the road. 2 retired professors who had brought me sourdough bread when I moved in. I made sure the house was blazing with light. Every sconce, every chandelier, every floor lamp was turned on. From the valley below, Ravenfall Lodge must have looked like a lighthouse, but I added one specific decoration that wasn't festive. Right inside the foyer, on a sleek black music stand I had dragged from the study, I placed an open folder. Inside, clearly visible to anyone standing at the threshold, were 2 documents: the notice against trespass and the confirmation of the emergency motion filed by Rowan Pike. It was a cold, legal altar greeting anyone who walked through the door. At 8 o'clock, we were laughing. Lena was telling a story about a bear that had broken into her pantry, and the house felt exactly as I had dreamed it would: warm, alive, and safe. At 8:06, the perimeter alarm chimed. The laughter died instantly. I looked at the iPad on the kitchen wall. 2 SUVs were crawling up the gravel driveway. They moved slowly, presumptuous and heavy. "Is that them?" Drew asked, setting his drink down. "Yes," I said. My heart gave a single, hard kick, but I didn't shake. "Everyone, please stay where you are. Just be visible." I walked to the front door. I didn't open it immediately. I waited until I heard the heavy thud of car doors closing. I waited until I saw the shadows stretch across the frosted glass. When the doorbell rang, I threw the door open wide. I didn't hide behind the chain. I stood squarely in the center of the frame, dressed in a silk blouse and trousers, looking not like a victim, but like a CEO. The group on the porch was a tableau of arrogance. My father, Elliot, stood in the back, looking grim. My mother, Maris, wore a fur coat and a smile that faltered when she saw the crowd of people standing behind me holding champagne flutes. Grant was there, looking at his boots. Callie stood beside him, clutching her baby bump, looking exhausted and hopeful. But in front of them stood a man I didn't know. He was wearing a navy blazer that was too tight and carrying a leather briefcase. He had the shiny, polished look of a man who sold timeshares or bad insurance. "Good evening," the stranger said, flashing a blinding, practiced smile. "Ms. Larkspur, I am Trent Hollander. I am a family mediator. Your parents asked me to come along to facilitate a dialogue. We want to start the new year with a resolution." "There is no resolution," I said, my voice cutting through the cold air. "There is only a trespass." Trent chuckled, a condescending sound that grated on my nerves. "Now, Ava, let's lower the temperature. We understand there has been some miscommunication regarding the occupancy, but under the doctrine of consent by silence, and given the verbal agreements made with your father, he was trying to use pseudo-legal jargon to bully me. He thought I was alone. He thought he could talk fast and use big words, and I would step aside. You have 30 seconds to leave. I said. Trent sighed and opened his briefcase. I was hoping we wouldn't have to do this, but I have the occupancy agreement here. It outlines the terms of your brother's tenancy. It establishes that your silence following the initial notification constituted acceptance of the terms. He pulled out the document, the same forgery Rowan and I had laughed about. He held it up like a shield. It is signed, Eva, he said. We have a contract. I looked at the paper. Then I looked at the room full of witnesses behind me. Lena and Wyatt had moved closer, their faces stern. Mina had her phone out, recording. That document is a forgery, I said loud enough for Callie to hear. It is a valid signature, Trent insisted, stepping forward. Show me, I said. He faltered. Surprised by my aggression, he held the paper out. I pointed to the signature line. Read the name, Mr. Hollander. Eva Larkspur, he said. Read the whole signature, I corrected. Eva J. Larkspur, he read. I looked directly at him, then at my father. My name is Eva Marie Larkspur. I do not have a middle initial. My mother does. Her name is Maris June. Whoever forged this was so used to writing her name that they projected her identity onto mine. The silence on the porch was deafening. Trent pulled the paper back. Looking at it with sudden confusion, my father's face went gray. That is a clerical error, my father snapped. The intent was clear. The intent was fraud, I said. And you just presented a forged document to the owner of an LLC in front of 4 witnesses and a camera. I gestured to the music stand. That is a notice against trespass. You are currently violating it. The sheriff has a copy. The judge has a copy. If you do not turn around right now, Mr. Hollander, you will be answering questions about why you are trafficking in forged deeds. Trent Hollander looked at the stand. He looked at the paper in his hand. Then he looked at my father. The arrogance evaporated. He realized he wasn't part of a family intervention. He was an accessory to a crime. He took a step back, but the real explosion didn't come from the lawyer. It came from Callie. She had been watching the exchange, her eyes darting between me and Grant. When I mentioned the middle initial, I saw the color drain from her face. She looked at Grant. Grant, she whispered. Grant didn't look at her. He stared at the floorboards of the porch. They told me she agreed, Callie said, her voice trembling. She looked at me, tears welling up in her eyes. Ava, they told me you invited us. They said you wanted us here. They said the paperwork was just a formality because of the LLC. I never invited you, Callie, I said softly. I told them no from the very first text. Callie turned to my mother. You showed me the texts. You said she was just being difficult about the dates, but she wanted us to come. She is mentally unwell. Callie, my mother said, trying to grab Callie's arm. She forgets things. We are doing this for her own good. Callie pulled her arm away violently. She is not the one who forgot her own name on a contract. The scream echoed off the mountains. Callie looked at Grant, her husband, the father of her child. You knew we were breaking in. Grant finally looked up. Babe, we need the house. The apartment is too small. It was just going to be for a few months until I got the promotion. Eva doesn't use it anyway. It is just sitting here. It is stealing, Grant, Callie sobbed. I am standing on a stranger's porch with a baby in my stomach, and my husband is a thief. It is not stealing if it is family, my father roared, losing his composure. I am not raising a baby inside a lie, Callie said. Her voice broke, but her spine straightened. She looked at me. Ava, I am so sorry. I didn't know. I know you didn't, I said. Callie turned around. She looked at the SUVs. She looked at the family she had married into. Then she looked past them, to where Lena's car was parked in the driveway. I can't get in the car with you, Callie said to Grant. I can't look at you right now. She turned to Lena, who was standing in the foyer. Can you? Is there a taxi service up here? Lena stepped out onto the porch, ignoring my father's glare. I am driving down to the city tomorrow morning, honey. You can stay in our guest room tonight. Come on. Lena put an arm around Callie. They walked past Grant, past my mother, who stood with her mouth open, past the fake mediator. Grant reached out a hand, but Callie flinched away as if he were hot iron. "Callie, don't be dramatic," my mother hissed. "Get back in the car." "Don't speak to her," Lena said, her voice like granite. "She is my guest now." They walked down the steps. The script was destroyed. They had come here to stage a scene where I was the villain and they were the saviors. Instead, they were standing in the cold, exposed as liars, watching their golden child's marriage disintegrate because of their own greed. Trent Hollander snapped his briefcase shut. "I think my services are no longer required," he muttered, and he practically ran to his car. Grant stood there, watching his wife walk away. He looked at me. For a second, I thought he might apologize. I thought he might finally see the wreckage he had caused. But he just sneered. "I hope you are happy. You just destroyed my family over a stupid house." "I didn't destroy anything," I said, my hand resting on the door frame. "I just turned on the lights." I stepped back and slammed the heavy oak door. I threw the deadbolt. The sound was final. The echo of the door slamming shut in Part 9 was still vibrating in the floorboards. But I knew the scene on the porch was not over. Grant was still screaming. My father was still posturing. They were not leaving yet because they still believed they had the power to demand a final word. I turned my back on the wood of the door, facing my friends in the foyer. They looked tense, ready to jump in if the glass broke, but I held up a hand. I did not need them to fight. I had already arranged for the heavy artillery. I looked toward the hallway that led to the kitchen, where the shadows were deep. "Officer," I said, my voice calm and conversational. "Now." Heavy boots stepped out from the darkness. Deputy Miller, the same officer who had responded to the drill incident, walked into the light of the foyer. He wasn't alone this time. He was accompanied by a second officer I didn't recognize. They had been waiting in my kitchen for the last hour, drinking coffee and watching the security feed on my iPad. I unlocked the front door and pulled it open again. The tableau on the porch froze. Grant was mid-shout. His finger pointed at the wood where my face had been. My father was reaching for his phone, likely to call the fake HOA board he had invented. Trent Hollander was halfway to his car, looking like a rat fleeing a sinking ship. "Stay where you are," Deputy Miller commanded. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the absolute weight of state authority. Trent froze with his hand on the door handle of his sedan. My father spun around, his face going from red to a sickly shade of pale. "This is harassment." My father sputtered, trying to regain his footing. "You cannot ambush us like this. We are leaving. You are leaving when I say you are leaving." "Mr. Larkspur," Miller said, stepping out onto the porch. He ignored my father and pointed a gloved finger at Trent. "You, the one with the briefcase, come back up here." Trent hesitated, looking at the open door of his car as if measuring the distance to freedom. Then he saw the second officer standing by the railing. He slumped and walked back up the steps. "I am just a mediator," Trent said, his voice cracking. "I was hired to facilitate a conversation. I have no knowledge of the legal specifics." "Is that so?" Miller asked. "Because the homeowner says you presented a document you claimed was a binding contract in the state of New Hampshire. Practicing law without a license is a serious offense. Let me see your bar card or your mediator certification." Trent patted his pockets, his eyes darting around wildly. "I left my wallet in the car. Look, I am a consultant. Family dynamics. I am not a lawyer." "He is a scarecrow," I said, stepping into the doorway. "My father hired him to look official so I would be too intimidated to read the fine print." Miller turned to my father. "Is that true?" "You hired an actor to serve fraudulent papers to your daughter." "It is a family arrangement," my father yelled, the veins in his neck bulging. "We are trying to put a roof over my son's head. She is the one who is unstable. She is the one breaking this family apart." The accusation hung in the freezing air. Breaking the family, that was always the ultimate sin in the Larkspur house. If you didn't comply, you were the breaker. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had stuffed fake affidavits into a mailbox at 2:13 in the morning. I felt absolutely nothing for him. No fear, no guilt, no love, just a profound, clinical clarity. I didn't break the family. Dad, I said. My voice was soft, but in the silence of the mountain, it sounded like a gunshot. You broke it when you only remembered me as a resource. You broke it when you decided I was just an asset to be liquidated for Grant's benefit. My father opened his mouth to argue, but the truth of it seemed to hit Grant first. Grant was standing by the railing, staring at the empty spot where his wife had been standing minutes ago. He looked at the fake mediator. He looked at the police. He looked at the parents who had promised him a mansion on a hill. "You told me it was legal," Grant whispered. He turned to our mother. "You told Callie that Eva signed the papers. You told me the lawyers handled it." "We were handling it," my mother cried, her voice shrill. "We were doing it for you, for the baby." "You lied to me," Grant said. His voice rose, cracking with a mixture of shame and fury. "I just lost my wife because you people couldn't admit she said no. I stood there and told Callie it was ours because I believed you." "Grant, listen to me," my father started. "No," Grant screamed. "You made me a thief. I'm going to have to beg her to even look at me again." He turned away from them, disgust radiating off him in waves. He looked at me one last time. There was no arrogance left in his eyes, just the hollow look of a golden child who had finally realized the gold was just painted lead. He didn't say goodbye. He just walked past the police, got into his car, and slammed the door. Deputy Miller turned back to my parents. He pulled a thick manila envelope from his jacket. "Mr. and Mrs. Larkspur," Miller said formally, "this is for you." My father didn't take it, so Miller tucked it firmly under his arm. "That is a copy of the emergency protective order granted by the judge this afternoon," Miller explained. "It details the evidence regarding the mail tampering and the forged signatures. We have the video from the trail cam. Elliot, we have the metadata. The district attorney is reviewing the file for potential criminal charges regarding the interference with U.S. mail." My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Criminal charges. We are respectable people." "Then start acting like it," Miller said. "If you set foot on this property again, if you send so much as a postcard to this address, you will be arrested. This is your one and only warning. Get in your vehicle and leave." My mother looked at me. For a second, I saw the gears turning in her head. She wanted to wail. She wanted to collapse on the stairs and cry about how ungrateful I was, hoping that the sight of her tears would make me retract the police. She looked past me, into the foyer, seeking an audience, but she saw Mina. Holding her phone up, she saw Drew, arms crossed. She saw Wyatt and Lena's husband, standing like sentries. There was no sympathy here. There was no one to manipulate. The stage was dark. She closed her mouth. She pulled her fur coat tighter around herself. Looking suddenly very small and very old, she turned and walked down the stairs without a word. My father followed her, clutching the envelope of legal doom like it was a contagious disease. Trent Hollander scrambled into a sedan and sped off before anyone could ask him for ID again. My parents' SUV was the last to leave. I watched the red taillights fade down the winding driveway. The sound of their tires crunching on the gravel grew fainter and fainter until it was swallowed by the wind in the pines. They were gone, and this time, they weren't coming back. The bridge wasn't just burned, it was legally dismantled. Deputy Miller turned to me and tipped his hat. "We will file the report tonight. Ms. Larkspur, you have a good new year." "Thank you, Deputy," I said. "For everything." The officers walked to their cruiser. I watched them drive away, leaving the mountains silent once more. I stepped back inside. The warmth of the house hit me, smelling of wood smoke and the expensive spices of the mulled wine Mina had made. I closed the heavy oak door. I turned the deadbolt. Thanks. It was the heaviest, most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a chapter ending. It was the sound of a vault locking shut, keeping the treasures inside and the monsters outside. I leaned my forehead against the wood for just a second, letting out a breath I felt like I had been holding since I was 18 years old. I checked the lock one more time. The smart lock glowed green, then faded to black. Secure. I turned around. My friends were still standing there, giving me space, unsure if I was going to break down. "Eva," Mina asked softly, "are you okay?" I looked at them. I looked at the high ceilings of my fortress. I looked at the folder on the music stand, my shield and my sword. I felt a lightness in my chest that was almost dizzying. I wasn't waiting for a text. I wasn't waiting for an apology that would never come. I wasn't waiting to be invited to my own life. I was already there. I smiled, and it was the first real smile of the new year. "I am perfect," I said. I walked toward the kitchen, where the copper pot of cocoa was still steaming on the stove. "Who wants extra whipped cream?" Thank you so much for listening to this story of boundaries and justice. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening from a cozy room, on your commute, or maybe from your own mountain fortress? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed seeing Eva take back her life, please make sure to subscribe to Veronica Revenge Stories. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this story reach even more people. Your support means the world to us.